being able to attend more. So you should always remember these words, Divya Gyan Hriday Prakashito. And because the spiritual master enlightens with Divya Gyan, one feels obliged to him. Yasya prasadad bhagavat prasado, yasya prasadan nagati kutopi. And there's a footnote with the translation. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one received the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. So this Guru Puja is essential. Who was just saying that? It was Chaitanya. Chaitanya Kripa reminded me. Just as the deity worship is as essential, it is not cheap adoration. It is the process of enlightenment, of Divya Gyan. Thank you very much. Not only was Prabhupada reminding his disciples that he hadn't forgotten them, but he was also reminding them that they should not be absent from the Guru Puja and worshipful thoughts of the spiritual master, even if he was not able to personally come before them. Srila Prabhupada mostly stayed alone in his room, and during the day he would move from one desk to another, either to dictate the Bhagavatam, to take prasadam, or to speak to guests. He was especially prolific at his writing. Rising at 1 or 2 in the morning, he would dictate 90, 100, and occasionally almost 200 digits on his dictating machine. This is more than he had done in months. The dictating machine is measured in feet. So there's a counter, how many feet are being, you could say, recorded in any given session. If you look at the dictaphone on Prabhupada's desk, it's the same dictaphone he used all around the world. There's one in Mayapur, one in Bombay, there was one in New York, so that's the New York one. You can see the counter. But he had little appetite. He could not eat anything heavy, and sometimes he had no appetite even for a cup of milk. Palika Dasi and sometimes Shirchor Gopinath, a Bengali devotee, were the cooks. Srila Prabhupada liked Shirchor Gopinath's sukta, made from neem leaves, eggplant, bitter melon, potato, sweet potato, and yogurt. Okay, all the cooks taking that down? Raj Mohan, wherever you are, please take note. One morning, Srila Prabhupada asked for orange juice, but there are no oranges in the kitchen. Gopinath ran to get them. But when he returned, Srila Prabhupada was ringing his bell. Gopinath rushed in and told him, "I am just coming." It takes time to make the juice. After a few minutes, when the juice did not come, Srila Prabhupada began repeatedly ringing his bell. As Gopinath at last entered with the juice, Prabhupada spoke out angrily, "I am sick with no appetite. And when I have a little hunger, then you take ours." He said he didn't want the juice, but Gopinath put it on the table anyway. Srila Prabhupada picked up the glass and drank. "You are serving me so nicely," he said quietly. "I am always chastising you. When one gets old, he becomes short-tempered." Gopinath had not felt bad about the reprimand, but on these humble words from Srila Prabhupada, he felt terrible. Gopinath became so emotional that he could hardly speak. Yet he managed in a choked voice to say, "Please, Srila Prabhupada, don't speak like that. I make mistakes, and if you don't correct them, then who will?" There were many little personal exchanges like this between Srila Prabhupada and his assistants, but sometimes he would be more silent and inward than they had ever seen him before. He would spend time chanting and reading, and only on special occasions would he see a guest. Srila Prabhupada agreed to an interview with Mr. Koshi, assistant editor for the Current magazine. Mr. Koshi's approach was not reverent, but provocative, in search of a lively interview. Prabhupada was interested in speaking to many people through a magazine article, but he had no interest in flattering the editor or in compromising, especially of late, as at the Bombay Pandal, Prabhupada was speaking in the most plain, direct words. Whoever approached him, he informed about Krishna and their illusion in not accepting Krishna. Mr. Koshi asked Prabhupada why he had been recognized first in countries other than India. Prabhupada's response: because they, Indians, are so poor that they cannot purchase diamond, said Srila Prabhupada. But diamond must be there. They are so poor-hearted. Their education has been so poorly given that they cannot understand. Poorly given? Asked Mr. Koshi. Yes, replied Prabhupada. They are teaching, you are this body, jump like cats and dogs, that's all. That is nationalism. It is you are this body, jump like cats and dogs. A group, as a group of crows gathered together, caw, caw, caw. That has been taught. Make a group and crow. But you don't find this word nationalism in the Bhagavad Gita. These are all borrowed words. So what is your alternative? Asked Mr. Koshi. We are preaching internationalism, said Prabhupada. Everyone welcome. Come to Krishna consciousness. Here is Christian, Hindu, here is African, Mohammedan, everything. That is real United Nations. If they are thinking that I am American, then why are they after a poor Indian man? Indians are known outside India as poverty-stricken. That's a fact. But actually, we are not poverty-stricken. If we cultivate our own standard of knowledge, Bhagavad Gita, then we are the richest. We can give the whole world these gifts. Prabhupada said it was regrettable that scholars and politicians pretend to be students of Bhagavad Gita without even knowing the difference between the body and the owner of the body. They do not even know the first lessons of Bhagavad Gita. So what is the solution? Asked Mr. Koshi. Solution, shouted Prabhupada. You learn it. But they don't want to do it, said Mr. Koshi. And they will go to hell, said Prabhupada. What can be done? If you want to cut your own throat, you can do it. Who can save you? But our duty is to say, don't commit suicide. Mr. Koshi made a case for drinking tea and coffee. He could not see how such things were sinful. Prabhupada explained that they were intoxicants. But there are several million like me, said Mr. Koshi. Millions of zeros does not mean one. Just see Prabhupada's quick wit. Quick wit. Zero is zero. If there are 7 million zeros added together, you cannot make one. Mr. Koshi also wanted to ask Prabhupada why Prabhupada paid so much attention only to Krishna, since there were hundreds of gods in the pantheon. But Prabhupada stopped him short. Shall we continue? Mr. Koshi asked about the brainwashing controversy. There are so many accusations, said Prabhupada, but now it is in court. But you don't require recognition of any court, do you? Asked Mr. Koshi. You require, replied Prabhupada, laughing. I don't require. You require. Yes, until then, said Mr. Koshi, there is doubt. Because you are after the court, said Prabhupada, after the judges, we are not after anyone. We are after one, Krishna. That's all. We know what our duty is. Srila Prabhupada further explained that opposition was coming in America because so many young people were taken to Krishna consciousness. Young men are taking it, said Prabhupada. They are preaching. They have sacrificed their lives. So they are intelligent persons. They can understand that they should not die. Krishna consciousness is not an old man's recreation. No, said Mr. Koshi, but you are responsible for it. I am not, said Prabhupada. Krishna is responsible. I am just distributing. My duty is to distribute, that's all. Mr. Koshi asked Prabhupada if he was happy with the way his movement had spread. And Prabhupada replied, why shall I not be happy? I am not manufacturing anything. That is not my business. Jumping from one topic to another in search of readable magazine copy, Mr. Koshi asked Prabhupada, how is your health now? Not good, Prabhupada said. Health or no health, it is the outward machine. That doesn't matter. But if it is a good machine, then it helps. That's all. Otherwise, machine good or bad, it doesn't matter. What happens when the machine stops? If your machine has stopped, Prabhupada said, You take another machine, that's all. Why shall I be overwhelmed? Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from 3rd Canto, Chapter 10, texts 18 through 21. Is that correct, Mr. Arjuna? 18 through 21. Anyway, we'll chant. So we'll chant through these first 2 verses and chant verse 21. I'll chant. Saptamo mukti sargastu sadvidastastu sam shaya vanaspat yoshadi latta takshara virudo drama. I'll just chant these. Huh? 18 through 21. That was 19? Does it say 18 to 20? Yeah, 18 to 20, excuse me. So I'll read 18 also. Sadime prakritak sarga vaikritana pime shrinu rajo bhajo bhagavato lile yang harimeda saha saptamo mukti sargastu sadvidastastusam chaya vanaspatyo shadi latta takshara virudo dramaha. Okay, and 20. Utsrotasastamak praya antaksparsha visheshanaha. And I will chant 21. Tiraschamastamak sarga. Tiraschamastamak sarga. Sostaving sarvidomataha. Sostaving sarvidomataha. Avido bhuri tamaso. Avido bhuri tamaso. Grana gyardya vedana. Grana gyardya vedana. Please chant. Tiraschamastamak sarga. Sostaving sarvidomataha. Avido bhuri tamaso. Grana gyardya vedana. Tiraschamastamak sarga. Sostaving sarvidomataha. Avido bhuri tamaso. Grana gyardya vedana. Tiraschamastamak sarga. Sostaving sarvidomataha. Avido bhuri tamaso. Grana gyardya vedana. Tiraschamastamak sarga. Sostaving sarvidomataha. Avido bhuri tamaso. Grana gyardya vedana. Tiraschamastamak sarga. Sostaving sarvidomataha. Avido bhuri tamaso. Grana gyardya vedana. Anyone else? Tiraschamastamak sarga. Sostaving Shadvido Mataha Avido Bhuri Tamaso Granagya. Very good. Tirasham, species of lower animals. Astamaha, the eighth. Sarga, creation. Saha, they are. Ashtavingshat, 28. Bidat, varieties. Mataha, considered. Avida, without knowledge of tomorrow. Bhuri, extensively. Tamasa, ignorant. Granagya, can know desirables by smell. Ridyavedinaha, can remember very little in the heart. Translation and purport by Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. I can read the previous verses. Thank you for reminding me. Text 18. We'll just read the translation. All the above are natural creations by the external energy of the Lord. Now hear from me about the creation by Brahma, who is an incarnation of the mode of passion, and who, in the matter of creation, has a brain like that of the personality of Godhead. Text 20. All the immovable trees and plants seek their subsistence upwards. They are almost unconscious, but have feelings of pain within. They are manifested in variegatedness. Text 21. The eighth creation is that of the lower species of life, and they are of different varieties, numbering 28. They are all extensively foolish and ignorant. They know their desirables by smell, but are unable to remember anything within the heart. Purport. In the Vedas, the symptoms of the lower animals are described as follows. Who wants to chant that? Very good. Extra credit. Lower animals have knowledge only of their hunger and thirst. They have no acquired knowledge, no vision. Their behavior exhibits no dependence on formalities. Extensively ignorant, they can know their desirables only by smell. And by such intelligence only, they can understand what is favorable and unfavorable. Their knowledge is concerned only with eating and sleeping. Therefore, even the most ferocious lower animals, such as tigers, can be tamed simply by regularly supplying meals and accommodations for sleeping. Only snakes cannot be tamed by such an arrangement. Om Jnana Taranda Shagaranjana Shlakaya Chaksuram Litamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lankaya Tegaram Yakipatamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinatanam. Just want to acknowledge this beautiful outfit, Radha Govinda, created by Mother Vilas Manjari. So of course, everything in the Bhagavatam is interesting. So there's divisions of creation. Gives you pause to consider the various attributes, such as the ability to tame such animals, But even those who handle such animals regularly, they say that a wild animal is never tamed. And we've seen many times where even famous personalities who have such extensive experience are sometimes attacked by the animals that they have been handling for 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, it happens regularly. You read about it in the newspaper. Very famous personalities. Was that one in Las Vegas? Siegfried and the other fellow. Siegfried and Roy. That was their whole show, is handling these exotic tigers, lions. And, you know, one time the tiger was in a bad mood, just chewed the guy right up. Chewed him right up. Said, I don't need to take your instructions. I'm a wild animal. And that was that. Show was finished. After that, never again. Couldn't just be Siegfried, you know, or Roy. I forget which one it was. But anyway, the act was finished. So this is, and everyone, no one expects it. They think, no, I've invested so much love in this animal. Isn't that the same thing in the material world? We cultivate these relationships. We invest so much energy, time. We think we're doing everything right. And then all of a sudden, the man or the woman says, no, I want a divorce. I think, isn't that just like a tiger turning around and biting you or eating you? It's basically the same. It has the same effect. You know, the ego, everything is destroyed. Such a shock. So you cannot, the only friend that the living entity has, obviously, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And, you know, Prabhupada reminds us of this frequently. That, and who is there? Who is closer than Krishna in the heart? Suridam Sarvabhutam. Who is closer? Krishna is actually in your heart. Your so-called spouse or children, or all these other loved ones, they're not in your heart. You might think that they're in your heart until they turn on you. And how many analogies are I say, she ripped my heart out. Right? You hear it all the time. Broken heart. So there are no permanent loving relationships in the material world, except between the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it is his great fortune if he understands that. And this, you know, even Lord Brahma, we saw in that earlier verse, that his brain is compared to that of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But we understand the brain is not just is anything spiritual, technically speaking. It's just like Krishna programmed Lord Brahma. You know, now we have so-called advanced, we think we're so technologically superior to whatever, that we can do certain things. But essentially, Krishna just downloaded all the information Lord Brahma needed. And so that's, you know, essentially Krishna's brain. It's his intelligence. It's not our intelligence. Krishna's intelligence. He's giving. I give them the intelligence by which they can come to me. Otherwise, we have no. What is there? Is there any another source of intelligence? You know, maybe the internet. Is that a source of intelligence? You see so many people, they don't think for themselves. Now they have some, when we were young, on our bookshelf, every parent wanted to make sure that their children had an encyclopedia. So encyclopedia salesmen were very famous back in the 50s and 60s. They would go from door to door. And they would sell the Srimad Bhagavatam of material knowledge, the Encyclopedia Britannica. I think that was the most famous one. Every house had a set. Can you imagine how prolific these salespeople were? Every house had a set. Sometimes two different sets, because one was Encyclopedia Britannica, the other one was, I forget the name. But in any case, It was very exciting. And it was quite interesting before the age of computers. When we were young, we would just sit there and just go through the books A through Z, all the different topics of knowledge, material knowledge. But that was what there was, that and other literature. Now people have a variety of things to choose from, but mostly they're just herded like animals into a certain train of thought. No free thinking. There are no free thinkers. People don't come to their own conclusions anymore. They just, what's that term called? Group think. All right, group think. That's it. That's also there. We also have experience of that. When we talk to people, they're not really giving you an answer that was formed independently according to their own calculation and consideration. They just talk just like the rest of their peers in this particular age group. Nothing unique, just some parroted phrases. It's very disheartening sometimes to see them so devolved to that level where they can't form an original thought. It's very. So our job, of course, Navina has no difficulty in catching everybody on the fly. Boom, hey. Getting the book in your hands. Okay, the first secret is get the book in their hands. And so this takes conviction also. You can't become discouraged in such activities. Krishna is seated in everyone's heart. Our faith in that concept is what compels us to continue such activity. That this is not something futile that depends on my expertise or this other person's, even his receptiveness in one sense. Everything can be prompted, just like when you want to make a fire, you just gather the ingredients, you strike the match, and if the wood is dry, it lights. You just have to create the proper situation, the correct environment. And so when we go out to distribute books, this is the yagya, and all the ingredients are there. We don't even have to do anything, technically speaking, just be there and chant the mantras. Hey, where are you coming in from? Because we don't do airports so much anymore. That used to be the line. And in airport, of course, what else are you going to ask? People are very rushed. But everyone wants to speak something about himself. So that was a good line because it gets him to say, oh yeah, I'm flying in from this place or that place. So this was interesting. They know their desirables by smell. Everyone has seen, the lower species of life, dogs, pigs, they don't. And some of them don't even know, right? The famous analogy about the camel chewing thorny branches because he likes the taste of blood, not realizing it's his blood. And when you go to India and you see this, you realize this is a fact. That's all there is in the desert is trees with thorny branches because they have to protect the few leaves that they have from the predators. But the goats and the camels, they find some way to chew those thorny branches and just relish the taste of their own blood. Such an amazing phenomena. But material life is like that. I mean, what are we doing when we go to work, and spend 2-3 hours in a commute to go someplace? Aren't we basically wasting our life's blood in that endeavor? That time is gone. It can never be retrieved. Precious commodity, the most precious commodity. But we don't stop to consider these things. This is the trick of the material energy, to keep you so engaged in insignificant, useless ideas or concepts or activities that you don't have time to think. This is a real prison house of, what do you want to say? Like what you said, this mass hallucination, what's it called?
Mass conceptual trance.
Mass conceptual trance. Okay. This is it. Just like hypnosis. You open up the whatever device and all of a sudden, it's just beaming into your brain. You can almost see the transmission. You can hear Maya going in and covering all the corners of your material mind and just putting a layer of ignorance one on top of another. And this is, and for years in places like slaughterhouse, education, schools, imagine going there for years and years being told that you are this, not only are you this body, but you can choose anybody you want and any identity you want and any pronoun you want. And what's the point of such, who benefits from that? Not the innocent living entity. He's a victim. He's not being given real knowledge, simply fed one illusion after another. This is a very unfortunate situation. In the past, if someone had some misidentification, if he thought he was Napoleon, this is the classic example. If you watch any cartoons from the 1960s, you always had some character in there thinking he was Napoleon, holding on to his ulcer. The reason he had his hand in his thing is because he had an ulcer. So he was always trying to give some comfort to that. And who wouldn't have an ulcer trying to conquer the whole world? Conquer the known world. So, but yeah, crazy houses are filled with people who think there's somebody else. But nowadays they're all roaming around in the streets. So this has become a very interesting situation, Kali Yuga, before our eyes. Who would have thought even 30 years ago, 40 years ago? It's inconceivable. Lack of common sense. There's actually a lack of common sense. You have to really, really push in order to get people to kind of ignore it, which is that there's a type of intimidation like that. Just like when the cult, as it was mentioned in Leela Amrita and Prabhupada was describing, this was all happening in New York and other places, but mostly New York, where they were trying to, devotees were being kidnapped. Many were being kidnapped from, several from New York. And those who were lucky to escape came back and spoke of the horrors. Some were subjected to electroshock therapy, force-fed meat, pornography. Just this is the grossest form of indoctrination. And this is also what they did to the devotees in places like China and Russia. When they were caught, they were put in prison. They would not let you out until you ate meat. That was the test. So just imagine what you have to go through in some places in order to extricate yourself. So this is not a very pleasant thing to consider. We're fortunate to that extent that we don't have that level of control being exercised on the population yet. Now it is just subtle. The continued, which is there. Devotees fortunately see most of it, this mind control. But nowadays, most people, look, what does it say? Even the most ferocious lower animals can be tamed simply by regularly supplying meals and accommodation for sleeping. Isn't that what every living entity nowadays? They're all tamed like that. You give them a nice apartment, you give them some Whole Foods, market close by within walking distance, and they're tame. They don't want to think that I'm just a conditioned living soul. I don't want to look for any higher knowledge. No, I've got my kitty litter, and I've got my kibble, and I'm good. I'm good. Just like the lower animals. No different. Prabhupada used to say, there's big apartment buildings. What's the difference? The dog is sleeping on the street. You're sleeping in this. No difference. Sleeping is sleeping. Polished animal. That was Prabhupada's term. Polished animal. Simply sniffing out some arrangement for his pleasure. So we don't want this for the population at large. We don't want this for those who have the potential to be saved. On the battlefield, when there is mass casualties, they do a triage where they determine who has the best chance of survival. And they attend to those first. The ones who have excess trauma, they give them some comforting words, and then they say, I'll be right back. Because they're going to die in a few minutes. Give them some comforting words and move to the person who has some hope for survival. So we also tend to concentrate our efforts on those who show the most potential for understanding. You're not going to just speak to someone who has just a dull brain. Why would you waste your time unnecessarily? And Prabhupada's formulas, give them prasadam. So prasadam is an important weapon in our arsenal, secret weapon, Prabhupada said. And so therefore, Prabhupada established the Sunday feast, like we'll have tonight. And the devotees will carefully examine who is there to see, right? We're not profiling people. It's a no-no, not politically correct. Can't profile. But of course, everyone profiles. They just can't let people know because you'll be castigated and condemned. But the fact is, we want to try to see who is that person who shows a little promise. It's obvious to anyone with any intelligence. So this is the burden of the devotee has to continue the efforts of the spiritual master who expelled so much. What did Prabhupada say when in the previous reading? He said 3 tons of blood. 3 tons of blood to make a devotee. 3 tons. Who could imagine that effort? We think when we, somehow or other we've come in contact with this, the Association of Devotees, and maybe we thought it was an easy thing, but we don't realize how hard Srila Prabhupada had to struggle to create the situation that we could simply just walk in and occupy. And we take it for granted. And therefore we saw that devotees are not taking Guru Puja seriously. There's gratitude. If it's not there, then what are you? If we don't have that slight commitment to making an attempt to appear before the spiritual master and the deities, to express that gratitude, minimum level, then it's very difficult to expect that Krishna will favor you with this Dibya Gyan Hriday Prokasito. And then some devotee will think, well, I have to leave here. I'm not getting this the realization. I don't see any future. They have no ability to have the vision of what the potential is because they've been stunted by their short-sightedness. and have been stunted by their short-sightedness. And this is there's an analogy in the material world when a person cannot see a solution, even though it may be before him, or he may not have quite the faculties. He's described as myopic, which is not the physical myopia, which means short-sighted or nearsighted, but it means he's mentally short-sighted, myopic. So if you hear that term being used in relationship to you, those are fighting words, unless you're a humble soul. Okay? If you're a humble soul, it's okay. But if you're not a humble soul, somebody is insulting you, but they're using words that you don't understand. See, and they do that on purpose because they think they're superior. It happens all the time. We're discussing with, they think that devotees are not very intelligent. And we used to encounter these people and they would come and they would just start insulting us. And of course, we just walk away. We don't want to get into it. Someone like that, who wants to waste your time? But the point is, it reveals their mental condition that they think. And how is it? And we see that they'll never be eligible as long as they have an attitude like that. Simply insulting. So we, of course, we have to avoid this at all costs. We should never think of ourselves as superior in any situation. Devotee always takes the position of being a servant. This is not simply an exercise to accommodate, a premise that is being given to us theoretically. No, we have to exercise the reality, the action of being humble or having a service attitude. It's not just the words, it's the deed, right? Thought, words, and deeds. What's that, Maharaj, in sannyas Prabhupada described in Vrindavan? The sannyas means, thoughts, words, deeds, and action, but I forget the Sanskrit though, but it's there. And so that's the ultimate. So sannyas means action. Doesn't mean inaction, doesn't mean renunciation. It means the ultimate in action, putting everything together, mind, body, words together, united, no distraction. Not like the brahmachari who is always looking for some prasadam, or the grahastha who is always looking for some other sense gratification. No, this is the level of renunciation at in that sannyas ashram is not, everything is there, complete. Vyavasayatmaka buddhi ekeha kurunandana. Complete focus, no distraction. So we can all emulate that to the extent that we have the capacity. I was reading in the Bhagavad Gita last evening in the 3rd chapter in Karma Yoga that this, attraction and rejection, dvesha, raga, what is that? Bhayakro, what's that? Anyway, this is Kali Yuga. The memory is not as good as it used to be. But this attraction and detachment, renunciation and detachment. Gopal's looking up. Text, 3rd chapter, 34th. Karma Yoga. We have to be careful about being attached to the regulative principles as a cause of fall down also. In other words, one uses so-called regulated spiritual life. He thinks, okay, I'm a grahastha. Now I can have regulated sex life. But that regulated, if you're attached to that, then there's no benefit. What is the purpose? Is that 34? Because attachment and aversion. That was it. So we just need to it's also described there in Nectar of Instruction, where we have Niyamagraha and Niyamagraha. Those two, the same word, practically speaking. One is following the rules and regulations without knowing why, and not following. So it seems like a very thin line there. You have to follow the rules and regulations, but you have to understand what is the purpose of following them, to not just to control the senses just by some repression, but to develop actual detachment by experiencing that higher taste, vishaya vinivartante nirashidena. And if you're just simply holding it back and repressing, then there's no benefit, as Arjuna was pointedly told. So we have to be a little balanced in everything in our spiritual life, in our spiritual activities. We understand the concept of time and circumstance, but we don't abuse it. You know, otherwise you excuse everything and say, oh, just time and circumstance. He's been sleeping every day through Mangalarti. Oh, it's just time and circumstance. No. It's time and circumstance, yes. The wrong time and the wrong circumstance. So we have to kind of just find out what is it that, the karmis have that, what would so-and-so do, right? So we understand what would Prabhupada do. Of course, we're not Srila Prabhupada, so that's a false premise to begin with. But we understand that we have instructions that Prabhupada has given for most situations, most circumstances. And we need to, as he reiterated there in Prabhupada Lilamrita, that one should be attending Guru Puja. So sometimes we have to hear it, and it has to be reiterated. But we take, so there's that time and circumstance principle. I remember when, in the old days, before we were very evolved with so many elaborate, articulate arguments, it was very, very simple. When a person was a little bit, like a new person, was a little bit slack, the idea was you don't criticize someone who's in the shower trying to get clean. He's in the shower. The water's running. He has access to the soap. We give a little consideration, but it only goes so far. You can't stay in the shower forever and not make any effort to get clean. So this is obviously the analogy was the temple is the spiritual cleansing facility where you come and every option is there to have the tools to become spiritually pure, but you have to take advantage of them. So I remember Prabhupada saying, very interesting, with regards to forgiveness. Maybe someone else has heard it. He said, once, twice, thrice, even 4 times, but 5th time not. That's quite a generous consideration. Once, twice, thrice, even 4 times, but 5th time not. So that was Prabhupada's. So we should keep that in mind. People can be given multiple chances, but not 5th time. So don't get to that level of the 5th time. That's the analogy, the equivalent in American slang is 3 strikes and you're out, right? 3 strikes and you're out. Sometimes, and they'll say that, okay, that's strike 1. When you're getting too close to doing something foolish, someone may remind you, say, that's strike 1. Okay? And then next is strike 2. So we're at the point where, according to the sign, it's question and answers.
Thank you for your class. Very interesting point. I was thinking about two words we use regularly. That is, one is independent, doubtful, and the other word is common sense. Common sense, Srila Prabhupada said, is proper judgment in practical matters. Now, he said also about common sense, that we should not, common sense has no use in the understanding of transcendental knowledge. So should we be independent, thoughtful in terms of the scriptures or in terms of common sense? That's the point of discussion that I want to bring up.
So in practical matters, not in spiritual matters. And that, and the example was the devotee who was asking Srila Prabhupada many practical questions for which they had no answer. So Prabhupada's response after receiving that inquiry and answering many of the detailed points, because Prabhupada was very patient and he wanted to encourage that person. But then at a certain point in this exchange, he said, and if you don't know, use your common sense. And if you don't have any, ask someone who does. So that was his response. But it was, as you said, these are practical matters dealing with Srimati Tulsi Devi's care and attention. Yes, Mr. Navina.
Hare Krishna, thank you. We often hear that after controlling the tendency to control comes enjoyment. So it seems like that if we are aware of that these two are sequential, they're always together, because how can you enjoy unless you have some level of control? And we can see that highly advanced personalities, sometimes they may have given up gross sense gratification, but almost everybody struggles with the tendency to control. So could you say something on how to dovetail this propensity to control, or how to let go of it, or how to purify it? Because it can work for devotional service, but it can also turn into OCD, that a person is, in the sake of doing the good thing, actually creating more damage to others by trying to rule people's lives or ruin people's lives. So where is the balance? Is that common sense, or is there some formula? Because there's a lot of talk about devotee care and this and that, but then the baseline that we hear from it is always control, control, control. And that is not really so productive.
The first thing that comes to mind is the ability to, exercise whatever little compassion one has to try to temper the tendency to control. If one has personal experience of being in situations where control was not effective, then there's some practical experience that to use what works and what doesn't work is the repertoire. We just essentially, we're very careful when it comes to our interpersonal relationships, because you don't what did Prabhupada say, used in relationship to our life membership in India. He said, if you have difficulty in this, however, whatever reason, and the relationship which was previously whole is broken like a china plate, it can, although it may be put back together, there will always be cracks. So knowing this, it should be very clear that if you lose the trust, through trying to exercise control based on perhaps your motive to help a person, then you may be doing both of yourselves a disservice, because that you may have corrected the situation, but then you may have lost that person's trust or confidence, which may never, according to that analogy, be properly repaired. And this is evident, especially in intimate relationships, which are based essentially on trust. The person doesn't feel, it's like, that term cheating. They had a whole TV show called Cheaters. Anyone ever hear that show? Okay, so it was a story of private investigators hired to find or to confirm the cheating of the spouse. So the TV show is called Cheaters. I was a private investigator for a number of years, and that was one thing that was commonly requested. People ask you to, I think my husband's cheating. I want you to follow him. How many times I had to do that? It's quite lucrative, actually. It's the bread and butter of, the profession, one of them. But you see what happens. You see that when you're, whichever spouse it is, and you're speaking with them, you see the whole demeanor because of the loss of trust. It's quite evident. So this is not just between, husband and wife, but, between, God brother and God brother, or God sister, or spiritual master and disciple. All these things are based on this inviolable truth that there has to be always a very clear understanding of the relationship, the value of it, the extent of it, the nature of it, not just some sentimental appreciation, but an actual consideration. It's actually a matter of life and death, spiritual life and spiritual death. So delicate. One in an instance, we have names for it, the Hati Mata, the elephant offense. So that's in relationship to the spiritual master, but that can take place between any devotee. You can, and I'm sure if you don't have experience of it yet, you may encounter that situation. So we have to be very careful, not to go beyond our bounds with regards to trying to correct the person. If there's no relationship, it's not just a heavy-handed, do this because I said so. My dear father used to say, as many did in that generation, when I was doing something, I guess wrong, but there was some backstory. He would say, do as I say, not as I do. Okay? This is the classic principle that many parents exercise. They're smoking cigarettes, they're drinking, they're doing all these things, but you can't do it. Why? Because I said so. Why? Because I said so. So we're not like that. We're willing to take the time to culture and nurture our God brothers and God sisters. It's very important. Prabhupada spent so much time and in his words, 3 tons of blood, then what should we be prepared to sacrifice? It's not too hard for us to give a little attention to someone who's come to Krishna and make an effort. Like I said, once, twice, thrice, 4 times even, but 5th time not. That's all. We have our limits. We're not going to, waste our time. But at the same time, we're going to give as much as we can, because then we can understand that I've done everything I can practically do to assist this person, and they don't want assistance. That's the key. So yes, rather we should control ourselves and assist others. As I know, and I've seen devotees extend themselves. They can be the most merciful individuals, go out of their way. A shining example in my history is Jayananda Prabhu. I would watch Jayananda, who was one of the first disciples in San Francisco. When after we had just moved into 55th Street, they had given him a bus. They wanted him to take sannyas. Jayananda was like, no way, I don't want to take sannyas. But they gave him a bus, so he was traveling around the country with these young men. And Jayananda is the perfect elder brother. He is the big brother. When you think of big brothers, that was Jayananda. Big, strong, unlimitedly compassionate. And, so he would sit, any new person who came in, because in those days, people would move in pretty easily. You talk to them on a Sunday feast, all of a sudden, next day they're sitting shaved up in the temple. And Jayananda would put them in one spot, separate from everybody else, so they would all be chanting together. And he would go, and in order to keep them fixed, he would go to the kitchen, get them maha water and cups, and he'd sit them down and he'd pour them all a glass of water. And then if they would drink it, he would get up and he would pour some more, just to keep them fixed. And he would sit down, he would chant with them like that. And the striking thing was when he first came to the temple, I was standing in Mangalartik in Toshan Krishna, who joined in San Francisco. He's from Chicago, but he joined in San Francisco. And he nudged me and he said, the most humble devotee in ISKCON just arrived in the temple, as he had just arrived. And, that was the description. So, I'm foolishly looking around, how do you tell who's the most humble devotee, by physical nature? He was the biggest devotee in the temple. Jayananda was 6'5". He was huge. So if he would have said the biggest devotee in ISKCON, I would have immediately recognized him. But when he said the most humble devotee in ISKCON, I'm looking around. Of course, then he introduced me afterwards. Jayananda and I became fast friends. But, the point is, he was a friend to everyone, but he made you feel like you were special. In any of your dealings, he made you feel like you were special, like that. And of course, he could use that to his advantage too. If Jayananda wanted something, he got it. Just by the force of his personality of being so. So I remember one time when the devotees, and I've told this story before, but it illustrates a situation, how you can get something without being controlling or manipulative on a material level. So the devotee Prabhupada was coming in 76 for the Rath Yatra in July. And the devotees had gone down to rent one of Prabhupada's favorite cars, a Lincoln. He liked Lincolns. Ford Motor Company, Ambarish, so he liked Lincolns. So they went to go rent this car and they had $2,000 cash for a deposit. When they got there, the guy looked at them and said, what am I going to do with this $2,000? This is a $30,000 car. You have to have a credit card that, for the liability. And in those days, unlike today, nobody had a credit card. All these big men, everybody, even the sannyasis, nobody had a credit card. So they came back from it was the dealership, I believe. And they were like, what are we going to do? Prabhupada's coming into the airport, tomorrow morning. what are we going to get a car? So I said, okay, wait a second. Light bulb went off. My father has a brand new Ford LTD. It's not a Lincoln, but it's a brand new car. So I thought, let me go ask him. We didn't have cell phones or telephones. So I just jumped on the train. And we lived in Astoria, last stop, Ditmars. Me and Heymunga. Heymunga is a devotee who was holding the umbrella over Prabhupada when you see the videos. We were walking through the streets in our door to get to the house, knock on the door. I said, Dad, he was retired. I said, Dad, I need to borrow the car. I hadn't seen him in a year and a half, 2 years, like that, whatever it was. I need to borrow the car to go pick up Srila Prabhupada at the airport. Look at this. Says, I need it back tomorrow night. I said, deal, no problem. I'll wash the car too. So we took the car out in the backyard. We had it next to my house, and we washed the car inside and out because, Dad smoked cigarettes. So we had to clean it thoroughly, get the incense, vacuum it, make it all fresh. Then we drove the car back to 55th Street, parked it in the garage. We had a big garage where we parked the Radha Damodar buses and the Rath Yatra car, whatever. And then I'm thinking, I've got the keys in my pocket. I'm going to be driving Srila Prabhupada tomorrow. This is great. Worked out fine, according to my plan. So I'm sitting there thinking how nice this is, and all of a sudden, hear a knock on the door. Who is it knocking? It's Jayananda. Says, Prabhu, I need to borrow your car to drive Prabhupada. I said, Prabhu, come on. I said, it's my father's car. He said, I need to drive Srila Prabhupada. Jayananda had been working so hard to get these Rath carts finished. And I knew I was the only one at the time that knew he had cancer, because he had shown me in confidence. He asked me, what are these things under my arm? These big, huge lymph glands that were swollen beyond. I didn't even know how he was still continuing to stand. And he was losing weight. We all knew it. But anyway, so I realized, I have to, I can't refuse Jayananda, the way he asked, the most humble devotee in this kind. So of course I gave him the keys. My consolation was I got to drive, some of the other devotees. I didn't really mind. My father got the benefit. Prabhupada rode in his car. It was an amazing experience for him. And he met Prabhupada later at the Rath Yatra. So, it worked out just fine. But it just shows that just by that relationship, you can't refuse when someone is so pure as Jayananda was. It's not power. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, you're not on my, father's insurance. It's no such valid argument. So, and there's more to that story, but we should continue after, maybe if we sit at the table at breakfast, I'll tell you the backstory to Jayananda's wanting to drive Srila Prabhupada. Why was he so adamant? Because he was going to have Prabhupada's association when we got to the temple, but he wanted to be there in the car with Prabhupada. He had been very embarrassed the year before by the broken wheels on the Rath Yatra car. I'll tell you about that story. And Prabhupada was furious at Jayananda. Furious.
Thank you. Krishna likes to be controlled by the love of his devotees.
By the love of his devotees.
And so does the pure devotee.
And the devotees love to be controlled by the love of the devotees. Yeah. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Sri Radha Govinda Dev ki. You were looking for this? Yes. I saw Chaitanya looking for this. I had it in my B bag. It must have fell out.